Welcome to Commander Central, episode 288, and today we're going to be talking about what it's like to change the commander of your commander deck. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Rekdar.
Rekdar, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Very well, thank you. How are you all doing?
We are doing pretty good. You are recording. It's evening where you're at, and it is late morning, early afternoon for us. Is that correct?
Yes, down here in the sunny UK. It's absolutely pouring it down, but hopefully that won't get picked up too much.
Well, why don't you introduce yourself here briefly and tell us something about you?
I'm quite an unknown, really. I just hang about on the internet, just under the guise of Rekdar. And yeah, just hang around here and there in different Slacks and Discords and just lurk mostly more than anything.
Well, thank you very much for supporting us, supporting the show, and for listening to us every week. We really do appreciate it.
No, it's not a problem. I really enjoy the podcast. I like the casual nature of it. So it's exactly how my playgroup do it.
Well, thank you very much.
So, Rekdar, let's get to know you a little bit. When did you start playing Magic?
Only very recently, actually. A friend of mine who I work with literally came up to me and went, Rekdar, you're a nerd. I was like, yeah, thanks. Do you play Magic the Gathering? I said, no, I've never played it. I've played Yu-Gi-Oh! For years, but I've stopped playing that recently. He said, do you want to try Magic? There's this pre-release event for Guilds of Ravnica at a shop that I know. Do you want to come and join in? And as they say, the rest was history.
That would be a rough way to learn, is just going to a pre-release and like, oh, here's 6 packs, figure out how to make a deck.
Yeah, well, he helped me a little bit, but yeah, I pulled Emara, Soul of the Accord.
Oh, nice.
I'm quite the Lord of the Rings fan, and I was like, that was the card that I wanted. And he was like, right, just stick to green and white, and whatever happens, happens. And I mean, I got my teeth kicked in, but I enjoyed it.
The guys on the Legendary Creature podcast did a show earlier this summer about like bringing in new players to Commander, and they were talking about like just being at work and looking around and like, that guy looks kind of nerdy. I bet he'd like to play Magic. Like basically just like scoping out guys like that at work to try to find new players.
See, and now with remote work, that can't happen anymore.
Very true. Yeah, that's very true. So you started with a pre-release. What got you into Commander from then? What was like the next step that got you to play this big behemoth 100-card format?
Well, he tried to get me into Standard, and it was kind of how I got out of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where I was like, oh, I don't want to chase the meta. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. So yeah, my friend tried to get me into a Standard, but the rotating format is kind of why I dropped out of Yu-Gi-Oh! I didn't want to chase the meta. And the shop where we go at, their main F&M is a Commander Night, and they were like, "Hey, why don't you try this Commander format? Here's a kit. It's only £30, and you never have to get rid of it." I was like, "Oh, perfect! This is exactly what I want." Now 30 decks deep, I can see they were lying to me, but it is what it is, I guess.
30, I can barely muster up 6 decks, let alone 30.
Well, I must admit, this kind of format is something that, while I was playing Yu-Gi-Oh!, is something that I wanted to try in, like a more casual game. And so as soon as like, wait, there's a casual format where I can just make stupid decks. Oh boy! And yeah, I've just not stopped building since then.
So out of the decks you have, what is your favorite one?
My babies, my Emara, Soul of the Accord, which you covered recently, which I was like, hey, that's a great idea. Why don't I take some ideas from that? I have a Saskia Legendary Tribal, which is oodles of fun because nobody sees it coming. But my thanks to the recent set, thanks to Midnight Hunt, my mono white +1/+1 counters deck has had a huge boost and is actually really competitive now. It's quite nice.
Oh, nice.
So that's the flavor of the month this time.
Who was the commander of that one?
It's Anafenza. Is it Kintree Spirit?
Oh, sure. The mono white Anafenza from... Yeah, okay, gotcha.
Fate Reforged, yeah. I think where she's from.
Yeah, yep. I believe so.
Well, so speaking of Midnight Hunt, you just brought up the new cards like that. What are some other new cards that have caught your eye?
Well, my wife, she's into dark fantasy books. She just plays a bit of Magic, but she's really into a dark fantasy, and she's like, "Ooh, werewolves! Is there a werewolf commander?" I was like, "Oh, yes, yes, there is. Can we leave it a little bit while the prices go down, please?"
They're so not good though. I would feel bad trying to push you into doing something like that, because I've looked at it hard and I've helped someone build one recently, and I mean, playing fun and casual, it's okay, but if you want to actually win, I don't know if it's there. I feel really bad.
It's not that I don't think it's good. I just think there's so much upkeep and stuff to like mess around with, particularly now that you have two different werewolf mechanics. One that affects, everything constantly, plus in the old werewolves now with the way they used to flip. So you're going to get weird things where like some things are synced and some that aren't. And, in best case scenario, I think it's kind of a pain in the butt to probably track. But if you're mixing in some of the old werewolves with the new ones, that just seems like a nightmare to try to keep track of things.
Yeah, I wish they had like a kind of like how Plane Chase is, where they had an item or something like that, or once a turn you get to roll a die or something. It's like, oh well, now it's daytime for the rest of the turn or something, just so you could track it that way instead of having to be, well, I cast this many spells and this turns into this and this happens and whatnot.
They should just errata the old ones to work with the night day mechanic too. Like that, I don't think that would be that complicated, and I think that would make things a lot easier for a lot of people.
Oh, I agree.
So you're building a werewolf deck, though. Despite that sounds like an interesting challenge. So does she go to the shop and play with you, or do you guys just play together at home?
No, we just play together. She's not that confident going to the shop, unfortunately. As regular as we go, and I hope if people from my shop listen to this, don't take too much offense to this. It isn't the kindest place to newcomers, unfortunately. I just kind of grinned and bared it, and actually trolled my meta.
Nice,
because they're quite competitive. So I built possibly the worst deck, like a super hug deck with no win con, giving them all mana, and they just couldn't fight it because they were all fighting each other. Like, oh, I can get my win con. Oh, I can get my win con. It's like, haha.
Nice. Yeah, that's a problem in any kind of insular hobby like that. People aren't always the most welcoming to newcomers sometimes. That can definitely be a challenge you have to fight through to overcome. The shop where we play at currently, I think, is pretty good about it, but like not all the places I've put it in the past have been.
No, not even close.
So, yeah, it definitely can be tricky for sure. I get that. I'm actually having a friend and her son are coming over this Saturday morning because her son wants to learn how to play and she wants to learn how to play so she can play with him at home. He's roughly my son's age, so I'm going to do a little teaching session on Saturday morning at my house for a 14-year-old and his mom to teach them how to play. So that's because they don't want to go to a shop and kind of try to deal with that right away too. So I totally get that.
Yeah, it's a shame, really, but at least that's cool. They can come to you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It'll be a fun experience.
Well, I suppose most shops out there are not like ours, where we are, as employees, we're told by the boss that if new players come in, we're supposed to, if there's enough space where someone's behind the counter, we're supposed to go down and sit down with them and teach them how to play and help them learn everything.
I actually saw that happen, Chris, on Tuesday night. Somebody came in. Actually, it was a woman with her son again.
Okay.
And came in and asked about something, and I don't even remember who it was, but someone at the shop walked over and I was in a pod, but grabbed somebody else like, hey, can you? And he sat down and helped him out, and it was So they absolutely do that. They do a nice job of that. So, Rektar, back to talking about Magic here quickly with you. How have you dealt with like the fact that we got 114 new sets this year and just like the crazy influx of cards? Because you haven't been playing long, but I mean, even since 2019, we've seen a pretty big jump on the amount of stuff we get every year. Are you just like embracing it all, or have you taken some sets off, or how have you kind of handled that?
I don't take it all in. I think that's impossible. I think you go stir crazy. I really would.
Yeah, I think so.
I think a couple of my friends just ignore the pre-release season whatsoever and just like, when I pull it, I pull it. And I think there's a bit of there's something to that, because reading stuff on whatever spoiler site you go on to read your cards, I will read them and like a week before pre-release. But then I'll get the cards in my hand and just like, this card, I'm sure this card reads differently than what I read on the website, because this seems really good, and I didn't read that before. So I think there is a point to sometimes just ignoring it and just pulling what you pull and go, hey, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, because I kind of agree. It's tough to keep up with this. I actually had to see. So we're recording on Thursday, so this comes out on Monday. But So last night, which would have been last Wednesday, we had a writer who wasn't able to get an article done for EDH Rec. So Joey Schultz, who I recorded the EDH Rec cast with, he's our editor at EDH Rec for articles. He quick hit me up when we were streaming. He's like, hey, can you finish an article by chance in the next 2 hours? And I had one that I've been working on, so I quick like, yeah, when we're done streaming, I'll finish it up. So we had something to go Thursday morning. So I stayed up late and finished writing an article. And one of the things I was looking at was just the sheer amount of sets. And because we still have one to come this year. We still haven't gotten the Crimson Vow set. And I was looking at it like, well, we have a short break till Crimson Vow comes out because it's not getting released until, in November. I forget what the date was, the 16th or something. But if that's the release date, that means the pre-release will be a week before that. So like, November 8th or something, which means spoilers will be done a week before that, which is like the 1st of November, which means spoilers are going to start 2 weeks before that because of 2 week spoiler season, so mid-October. And then we always start getting those couple of preview cards that WotC reveals to kind of tease the upcoming set, which could be today. Like literally we could start getting those preview cards in the next several days. So we're already almost ready to start the next preview season, and Midnight Hunt's been out a week.
So here's how not ready I'm ready for that, Dana. Today I learned the set is called Midnight Hunt. I've always thought it was Midnight Haunt. So here I am a week after the sets come out, a month after all the spoilers, and I've been calling the set the wrong name for 4 weeks, so I'm totally not ready for
Why do you
vampires.
think it's haunt? I mean, it's werewolves. You'd think, they're hunting, rawr,
Yeah, but it's all spooky season Innistrad. It's haunting, I just went with the aesthetic of the set.
For the longest time last summer, in my head, I think before the official names were announced, I was still doing Vampire Wedding for Crimson Vow and Werewolf Bar Mitzvah from the joke from 30 Rock.
They should have stuck with that.
So it's like that's what I was still thinking of was, and I still to this day still kind of think of Midnight Hunt as the Werewolf Bar Mitzvah.
Mazel tov.
Which was written by Donald Glover. That was one of the first things he did. Yeah, little Donald Glover trivia for y'all. Okay, so Rek'Thar, have you played any fun games lately? We usually kind of spend a few minutes talking about cool games we played. Anything interesting for you?
Yes, I always try and get some games in where I can. I'm a shift worker, so I have a few days off, thankfully. And just to shout out my wife for a moment, when the pandemic started, before all it, Spell Table became a thing, she sat down with me and said, do you want me to learn Magic? I know you're going to miss going to the shop and that. And I was like, oh, that'd be really cool. Thank you very much. Yeah, okay, but now she's got 4 decks, and we were playing the other night, and she has a Lathliss Dragon deck.
Oh, nice.
And my Amara deck actually popped off for a change, rather than hazing me. And I made about 300 tokens, but it tapped me out, and I had no responses. I was like, right, I'm going to kill you next turn. What have you got? And she still asks questions every now and again because it's a complicated game, and and she just turned to me and said, if I tap 6 mana and cast this Magma Quake for 4, I was like, oh. I was like, you didn't need to ask that question, did you? You're just being sarky now.
That's the kind of the best way to do it.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Nice. Well played to your wife.
She does revel in just one-upping every now and again.
How about you, Max? Anything interesting from you?
I have not played yet, but I have ordered cards for a new deck.
Oh, that's right. We talked about it the other day. What deck is it? Are you willing to reveal that yet, or is this a secret?
I'm building a partner deck. It's going to be Tormod the Desecrator and Kamal Heart of Krosa. So, zombie and a little bit of Reanimator theme, which is outside of my playstyle. So this will be new and exciting.
Golgari zombies too, which is kind of a fun, weird thing that you don't see too often.
Yeah.
Yeah, looking forward to playing against that. I had a couple little ones here I want to briefly touch on. One thing, and I've done this in the past. I know I've done it with Max, but like I was playing a game with the shop this week, and I cast, I think it's Urza's Bauble. I think Mishra's Bauble looks at the top of a player's library. Urza's Bauble is a random card from their hand. I hit the player next to me with Urza's Bauble and did the random card, and they had a mountain in hand. And when I do that sometimes, just because I find it funny for myself and I like to amuse me, it was a mountain, but I spent like 10 seconds reading it, acting like it was a really complicated card or something. And I go to hand it back to the guy, then I stopped and wrote it back and read it again. And then everyone's like is freaking out, trying to figure out what the card was. And I hand it back to the guy, and he looks at it and then looks back at me, and it takes it, and he's trying not to laugh and puts it back in his hand. And then for like the next several turns, people are trying to like wait to see what crazy bomb he's holding in his hand. And it was just a mountain.
That's great. But with like the new basics where they come out of not Midnight Hunt, but the set before they had all the text on the bottom basics. Of them anyways.
Yeah. And then I played on stream last night for EDH Rec, and we had Don Miner, who created EDH Rec and is the owner of the site. He was on playing with us. And Don tends to play a little bit more powerfully than most people we play with.
That's an understatement.
He doesn't play quite competitively, but like he doesn't mess around either. I mean, he's not afraid to run like the Abyss in a deck or something. So he's got a pretty deep collection, and he will run strong cards. And he was playing he had a new Iroas deck, who is the old god from the first Theros set, the red and white one. So it's kind of an aggressive aggro Boros deck he had. And Joey and Matt, he had killed off both Joey and Matt somehow, and he should have had me beat. But he said, he's like, I'm going to do the greedy play here. And he went to cast Obliterate because his commander's indestructible. So he was going to basically wipe the board and guarantee I couldn't respond, and then kill me with his commander who's indestructible. And I had a Teferi's Protection in hand. So I was able to dodge the Obliterate, and he lost all his lands. Luckily, he's like, oh, okay. And he floated a single white, which was the only thing he had left, because he just happened to not tap a land, lost all his stuff then, and was able to play a land tax that he had in his hand with the single white he floated. And then was able to, go get lands, and because he had a pretty good lead anyway, and I was, able to hit him for a few damage. But then he was able to build back up, and the game ended when he finally killed me. The final shot, I was at 1, and I got him down to 3 life when he finally cracked back and killed me. So it was 1 life versus 3 life at the end of the game, like 12 turns after the Obliterate. The game went that much longer.
Wow.
So, that was a pretty crazy ending before he finally took it, but it shouldn't have gone that long. He just was like, let's Obliterate and see what happens. And yeah, that didn't work out. So, but it was a super fun game. I had a good time. Well, if you out there in listener land want to share some fun games with us, or just tell us about any cool decks you're building, how'd you go about doing that, Chris?
Well, you can find us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central. You can also find us online at cmdrcentral.com.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central. Check out our reward tiers, such as a Decks You Play episode, or just joining our community to play virtual EDH. And this week we have 2 new patrons to say hello to. The first being Joshua Lorentzen, and then the second being Ken. So welcome, and thank you for supporting us.
Yes, thank you all very much. We do appreciate it. We have a couple of giveaways that are wrapping up here at the end of September. Listener Andrew Nolan was kind enough to provide us with a playmat, and which was a Nahiri Alt Art playmat for More the Spark, and also the Heroes of Dominaria board game. So thank you again to Andrew for supplying us with those giveaways. Jake Hughes won the copy of Heroes of Dominaria. So patron supporter Jake Hughes, thank you very much. We will get a hold of you and get your board game sent your way. And the Nahiri War of the Spark Alt Pro playmat was won on Twitter by Foxy_159, who you can find at Firefrost Strike. So we will reach out to you as well and get that playmat sent your way. So thanks to everyone who supported us, both on Twitter and in Patreon. And I think we have another giveaway next month. A local patron supporter gave me a sack of swag to give away the other night. So I think we're going to give away 5 different playmats next month as well. So we will announce that next week for the month of October, but that should wrap up September for us. So thanks to everyone who supports us in any way you can. It means a lot and we appreciate it.
Dana, I want my $10 back for not winning that playmat.
Sorry, man.
What, did you guys have like a side bet going or something?
Oh no, I just said pick me. Here's $10.
I took the money, but
yeah.
Capitalism. All right. Main topic here. So we want to talk about what it's like to have to kind of keep your deck, but replace the commander at the top of your deck. And I guess this is inspired primarily because a few weeks back, Golos got banned. Golos Tireless Pilgrim was the most popular commander in the format, which means tens of thousands of decks, quite literally, lost their commander. But that doesn't mean those decks just ceased to exist. A lot of them mutated to become a slightly different deck with a different commander. Obviously, that doesn't do you much good if you were playing, Golos Gates, but not every deck, or maybe even most of those Golos decks, were being that specific. In a lot of cases, they were using Golos as kind of a value engine to play a 5-color commander, so they could make kind of a switch to something else. But not everything is necessarily that dramatic. You don't always lose your commander and find yourself forced to switch things up. Sometimes something that is just a better fit for what you're doing comes along. Maybe it's a stronger commander that you like more. Maybe it fits your playstyle better. So people switch for that reason as well. We will touch on that. And sometimes there's instances where your commander just doesn't work, but you kind of like the deck. So you're just trying to figure out a way to make this concept work. And the best way to do that is to change your commander up as well sometimes. So we're going to talk about all those processes and see what they kind of look like. First of all, let's start with the Golos thing and talk about what it's like when it's not really a choice when you're kind of forced to make that swap. There were 7,000 different Golos decks in the EDH Rec database, and that's just decks that are like on the half a dozen different deck builder sites that they scrape for data. How many are out there in the wild? Who knows? But like literally we're looking at tens of thousands of decks that just lost their commander. Now, there's a lot of other options there for 5-color commanders. There's Kenrith, who already was very popular. Kenrith wasn't that far behind Golos. There's still 6,000 decks in the EDH Rec database. There's Sisay Weatherwhite Captain. There's Morophon the Bound List. There's Jodah Archmage Eternal. There's Ramos. There's Niv Mizzet Reborn. So there was a lot of decks for people to switch over to. And I think what's kind of interesting about a lot of the 5-color commanders is they tend to either be very kind of wide open value engines. Ramos and Kenrith definitely qualify there. I think Morophon kind of does. Jodah kind of does as well. Yeah, it's not a perfect switch, but like you can probably move in a lot of cases between those commanders and not see a huge change in your deck. Or I think they tend to be like super specific, and in which case there's maybe something else that does that specific thing. Like I don't know if you have to change a whole lot between the Ur-Dragon or Scion of the Ur-Dragon or Tiamat. Similarly, like let's say Sliver Queen gets banned tomorrow. Do you have to change that much when you're swapping to any of the different Sliver commanders? I don't think you probably do. So there tends to be options there. The three of you, do any of you know anyone really who had a Golos deck who had to make that change in person that you've talked to about it?
I haven't talked to anyone about it, but I know people around the shop that do have them. I just don't know what they've changed to yet, or if they've changed at all.
Rekdar, how about you? Do you know anybody who plays Golos had to make that move?
Yes, a close friend of mine, unfortunately. He was using it as a Golem tribal deck, because he looks like the Golem.
Oh, sure. that makes sense.
Yeah, and he was going to change to Morophon, and I've given him a Morophon to change to, but he's like, there's not a lot of golems. Some of them are splicers as well, so it's not a straight swap, as you say.
Sure.
So he's still playing with that at the minute, but it is what it is.
Yeah, there's a couple. Lenny Woolley, I think we talked about Lenny when we discussed the Golos ban list. Lenny had a Golos deck that I think he was playing as an Enchantress list, and he switched to a partner pair, and I can't remember what it was. So that's the move he made there. He was playing Abzan Enchantress basically with Golos as the commander, and he just moved to some Abzan partner pair that let him.
I know the partner. I know the partner. The one that has lifelink and lets you draw a card when you hit an opponent after each combat.
Oh, Timna the Weaver.
Timna, and then the green one that lets you drop permanents if a permanent enters the battlefield, not using the creature's ability, play another permanent.
So Timna Kodama.
That one, thank you.
Which, I mean, they kind of combine to be a Golos a little bit. Like there's a little bit of that, Golos let you play stuff for free and, go get a land. I guess drawing cards and playing stuff for free is pretty similar. So that's not a huge change necessarily, although it's on 2 cards versus 1 that was much easier to cast. But yeah, Lenny had to make that swap. That's the real one, like that I've seen personally that someone had to make as well. I heard someone in our shop the other day talking about switching over to Jodah from the Golos deck, but I wasn't sure what that was. And at least listening to him talk about it, he didn't seem like it was that big of a deal in his particular case. I'm sure it is a big deal in some folks' cases, but yeah, that's seems to have been something people have been able to deal with. Other than that, like we haven't had that many commanders that have been banned over the years. Like Iona, but like I don't think I ever saw a deck. I didn't see many Ionas in decks, let alone an actual mono white Iona deck.
Yeah, but doesn't she cost like 37 mana or something.
She does, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was probably part of that reason. Not only does she have a reputation, that was a big ask for mono white as well. So yeah, Golos is really the one that jumps out at me where like people just lost their entire, or at least it chained down and affects their entire deck when you lose your commander. So like that's the real big one. So let's talk a little bit about the theory here. Max, let's say Dromoka gets banned tomorrow.
I quit.
You're
the game
done, you're
entirely
out.
and I fell out. Yep.
You know how long it took him to find the foil and get the signature for that?
So what do you do in that case? Like, does that deck come apart, or do you try to tweak it and make it work with Sigarda, Host of Hurons, or Dromoka the Eternal or something? How does that work for you?
I think the initial thought is I would just put Sigarda, Host of Herons at the top of the deck, and then try to figure out how to kind of close that gap of people not being able to do stuff on my turns, which would probably mean getting rid of the flying tribal theme, unfortunately, because then I'd want something like, more silence effects, and then I would find cards like Docent of the Falling Leaf, and there's some artifacts that do it as well, and it'd probably turn into more of a taxing deck than anything, just because, I like being able to cast. The point of that deck is being able to cast all these fun draw spells that normally would get countered,
Right.
that rely on dealing damage. Without Dromoka in the deck, those are a little more risky, so I want ways to close that gap of what Dromoka provides when she leads the deck.
Although at least with Sigarda you have hexproof, so that kind of also, she's
True.
protected if you do those things as well. How about you, Chris? Like, let's say Mogus eats the Banhammer. Does that deck come apart, or do you just switch to like Obosh at Prey Piercer or Kevrak the Merciless or something?
I would definitely just switch. I don't know about those two per se, but I would switch. Like, there's a couple of them out there that I've actually even been contemplating on trying just to see how it played, just to try to ease, like what Mogus does, because Mogus just comes out and just sits there and does, 2 damage every turn. Woo,
Sure. I mean, Vile
Sometimes
Smasher kind of would do something similar.
Yeah, like I was thinking like, how do you pronounce it? Karazikar, the Eye Tyrant. From,
sure, yeah.
Yep, the Rakdos one that whenever an opponent attacks another one of your opponents, the attacking player and you each draw a card and lose 1 life. I mean, that seems really good. 5 for 5.
Sure.
Or I could just go real nasty and just play like Kroxa and just start, forcing everyone to discard it and lose 3 life if they don't discard, something good. So,
Sure.
I mean, there's definitely other outlets for me, but like Max was saying, things would have to change up a little bit. Like, because if I were to play like Obosh, I have to stick within, the realm of that, unless that's just for it to be a companion. But if it's not, then I have to stick within the 3 CMs or I think it's permanence or something or another. Yeah, so try to stick within that for odd number permanents. So I mean, it could be an option. We'll see.
I mean, Rek'Dar, same to you. Like your Amara deck, if Amara gets hit, is that something that do you like the deck itself enough, or is it the commander that you're attracted to, and would you not want to play it losing the commander?
It's more the commander that I'm attracted to be fair. I've been told for many years I should just upgrade it to Reese, but
sure.
I'm just stubborn like that.
No, yeah, I mean, that's the case too. Like, I guess it does depend on the deck too. It's one thing. There are some decks very much in my case where, like, there are decks where the commander is why I'm playing it, and there are decks where I like the deck more. And if I did lose the commander, I would be able to make the swap in some that I can. So yeah, I think it very much does depend on the deck for sure. So the next thing I guess that happens, and this is something I do have experience with. I've never lost a commander to a banning, but like there's been situations where an upgraded commander comes out. Maybe by upgrade I could mean anything. I could mean like power or an upgrade for me personally in how I play. It fits my style better, whatever. That's absolutely happened to me. And to give some kind of vague examples here, for a long time, Reese the Exiled was kind of really the only option if you wanted to play Golgari Elves. In this last year or so, we've gotten Lathril, Blight of the Elves, we've gotten Abomination of Llanowar, we've gotten Herald, King of Skemfar, as well as multiple green and black elves with partner in Commander Legends that you can use to kind of make your own Golgari Elf commander. So, like, literally in the last year, we've gone from basically one option to half a dozen or more different things if you count different partner combinations that you could do to play Golgari Elves. If you didn't love Reese the Exiled, there's a lot of chances for you to change that up and find something else without having to just ditch that deck. To speak to my own personal experience a little bit here, I built a landfall deck years ago, right before Battle for Zendikar was released, because I had assumed landfall would come back. I had wanted to make some kind of a lands deck, so I got most of the pieces together and was basically ready to make a lands deck, hoping we got something in Battle for Zendikar that allowed me to do that. And then Omnath Locus of Rage was spoiled. So I was like literally ready to go when Omnath came out. I had the deck all set. The cards were ordered. I grabbed Omnath, started playing, and very quickly kind of realized it wasn't the commander I wanted to do the things I wanted. That's not to say Omnath isn't really, really good, but that's not quite how I wanted to play that deck, because what I discovered playing Omnath was you were almost always way better off leaning heavily into some of the elemental stuff he does. Casting a Firecat Blitz for 11 and then just sacrificing them all to Ajnath's Ultra or something just domed somebody. Like, there were just a lot of situations where you were better off making elementals to sacrifice them to kill people than you were just fiddling around doing landfall stuff or lands matter stuff, which is what I wanted to be doing. So, flash forward 3 months later, I was kind of down on that deck. And then they released, in part because it felt bad for me to not play the deck the way it wanted to get played. I don't like fighting against what I felt like the deck was suggesting I do. When Mina and Den came out 3 months later, that just gave you an extra landfall and let you give something trample. It's probably a worse commander in almost every way than Omnath is, but it let me play the deck in the way I wanted to play it. It felt much more built around encouraging me to do land stuff than it did encouraging me to blow up elementals. I still have the deck together today, here, 6 or 7 years later, because the way Mina and Den play just played much better into what I was trying to do with that deck. So, I'll ask you guys, is that something, back to you, Max, I'll start with you, is that something you've ever dealt with, where you built a deck and then just something has came along that you felt it was maybe stronger, but for whatever reason worked better with what you were trying to do?
Yeah, when I first built Brago, I actually built it as Grand Arbiter Augustine IV. And for how much flack and hate Brago can get when it flips over in the command zone,
Grand
Augustine's way worse. And I think back then I was probably playing way heavier control than whatever Brago is, where, Brago's powerful, but Brago doesn't do much if Brago doesn't have a board state.
Sure.
So I think that's an advantage to that, where Grand Arbiter, you can just, slap some boots on it and cast a bunch of counter spells for free, essentially, and then lock the game out, or these days probably approach, or whatever you want to do, but at least Brago makes me play the game a little bit more than Grand Arbiter did.
This is kind of an aside to this, but I will make this comment about your Brago deck. Brago is a very strong commander, but I will say this, when I sit down and play against your Brago deck, or for the most part, any other Brago deck I've seen, I always think to myself, okay, this deck is really powerful. I have to be cautious and not let it kick off, so I need to be on my game. But I never feel like it's hopeless. I always feel like I have a chance if I play a tight game and don't miss things and pay attention, I can compete against that deck. There are some commanders where I feel like, if this person casts their commander, I'm just going to lose. I don't necessarily feel that way with Brago. I think Brago is strong, but I feel like I can do something to beat a Brago deck, whereas there are some commanders I feel like, okay, I have to get lucky because I'm already losing just by virtue of that commander existing. So I think Brago is strong, but I do want to say I do think it's absolutely a fair deck, I think. Chris, how about you? Is that something you've had to deal with before, where you've just found a better option for what you're doing and you've upgraded?
Not really. Not to find a better option.
Okay.
I've definitely found decks that don't work the way I want them to, and then they just go into the graveyard, the elephant graveyard over in the back corner. But
well, that's the kind of thing we might be talking about next week. It's a good little preview of the show I was thinking about doing for next week. So we'll maybe talk about what happens when your deck just has to get put out to pasture. Rek'Dar, how about you? Is this something that you've done where you've just been trying to make a deck work and you've just found a better option, either because something was released or you've just figured out this commander would work better?
Yeah, when I got Amara, the first thing that somebody recommended to me was that I build vehicles, because you want to tap on tap Amara 1,000 times. But the meta at the shop is very strong anyway, and obviously a slow vehicles deck doesn't really compete against that. And I was like, And then somebody showed me Tapala. I was like, oh, okay, throw some dwarves in there, throw some vehicles. But I found that I didn't want to pay the X all the time. There's not enough, back even 2 years ago, there wasn't enough way for Boros to get enough mana to cast something, then pay Tapala's X, then try and win the game. So I scrapped that idea, and that sat in the elephant graveyard for a little while. And then Rebet came out, and I was like, wait, if they have protection now, these vehicles get a lot better just instinctively from being there. And I had fun with that because I tried to build it more focused around the artifacts as well. But then I found that the artifacts was just a better deck, so that's just now a different deck that I have. Just to add to the growing pile. And then finally, a friend of mine said he was bored of his Elsha the Infinite deck. And he just went, hey, you know that vehicles deck that you've been trying for ages? Well, now you get access to blue and, say, all the token makers that it makes from enchantments and artifacts, and you get the vehicles off the top of the deck. Maybe that's the advantage you need. And you know what? It's worked really well. It's been a real good, fun deck to play.
Nice. Yeah, that always feels good when you just find the way to make that tweak and get the concept to come together. Feeling those puzzle pieces snap in always feels really, really good. That's very much how it was with that Mina and Den deck. Despite it being kind of a downgrade. Right? Like I switched to a worse commander and everything just fell into place. It just works that way sometimes. So how about this? Like where you found a different commander that just changes the deck basically. And I guess I'll use this example. I just switched. I mentioned this on the show 3 weeks ago or so, how I was thinking about turning my Veto deck to a Tavash deck. And the reason wasn't that it didn't play well. In this case, it was because every time I brought out Veto, people would be like, oh, so is this the Blood Bond combo? You're going to... Because you're in black, you can just tutor up the combo piece pretty easily. And, one half is in the command zone, you can just win then. And I always had to explain that, no, that's not what it's doing. So that was a little bit, I just didn't like having to explain that every time. And the deck was fun, but I didn't love it. It was fine. And I didn't have a mono black deck, so I was glad to finally get a mono black deck. So, it was all right. At some point when Strixhaven came out, Tavash Gloom Summoner, like, oh, it does things with lifelink. That'll be a good card in the deck. I didn't have a ton of creatures anyway. And I'm like, okay, well, whenever I gain life, I can pay life and make a demon. And I'll have a flying blocker. It'll keep me a little bit safe as I do Veto things. I got Tavash out a couple times and it was really fun to play. So I'm like, well, maybe I'll swap it into the commander and just test it out. It's totally changed the deck. It went from being a deck that was fine, and this is interesting, to a deck that's genuinely super fun to play. And that was just swapping the commander without making any other changes. Now, I've since made other changes to the deck that, taken out things that worked better with Veto and didn't work as well with Tavash, and it's got even more fun. And I think part of the reason I didn't really realize this until I was playing with Tavash as the commander, in Veto, you played Veto and you did something to gain life and it dealt damage to somebody else, and that was what it was. Oftentimes you killed somebody with something. If I was able to make enough mana and cast a spell that drew me enough life, someone would take 20 and they would die. What Tavash does is, number one, I'm never at a safe life total. In that Veto deck, sometimes I got up to 50 or 60 life and it was just, I kept gaining any life I lost. So it kept me from really, unless somebody comboed out, it was a little bit tricky to kill me once I got things rolling. Tavash doesn't work that way because I'm paying all the life I gain. My life total is constantly dropping too. That seems maybe counterintuitive, that it's more fun to play when you're at risk of dying. But it is, at least for me, it makes me have to pay a lot more attention. I'm like, okay, do I want to spend the 22 life I gain to make a 22/22 demon? Because it's going to take me down to 12. Do I want to do that? The answer is almost always yes, because that's much more fun for me.
That's just how you play in
Absolutely.
general, bud.
You are 100% correct. I'm not saying that's the right call. I'm just saying that's the more fun call for me. So that's what I found with Tavash. I just found it made me make decisions and do things that were much more interesting than anything I was doing with Veto. It just changed the face of the deck. It wasn't like it was better or worse as a commander power-wise or anything. It just made the deck suddenly be fun. And Rector RC, you have a note here about your Windgrace deck. What happened there with this one?
When Zendikar came out, I I finally had like affordable Lotus Cobra and other pieces to go into and actually finish building that Lord Windgrace deck like everybody else did at one point. But I found after 2 or 3 games that it just got really boring to take 15-minute turns and then not kill everybody. So I kind of did the same with you, and I had Radha Heart of Killed from, is it M21?
Yeah.
Yeah. I had her in the deck. I was like, well, she's always a threat. When I played her in the few games that I played her, it's like, she's always a threat on board. I'll just cut black and play Radha, since she'll help me with like my exploration triggers. Hopefully I'll miss them less than my Azusa, play extra lands since I can play them off the top. And even if because there's still quite a token theme in that deck, and even if I don't have any token generators, I can just put Radha out and there'll be a Rogue's Passage or an Access Tunnel or a Whisper Silk Cloak, or I'll have Embercleave in hand and just be like, no, she's a threat. Just
right.
But yeah, that works so well that and my wife actually enjoyed playing against it so much that that's now her deck.
Oh, nice.
So yeah.
Yeah, I'm the first thing I thought when Radha was spoiled was, I was like, oh, if I hadn't built Mina and Den, I would have absolutely, if I would have taken my Omnath deck apart, Radha would have also worked effectively to do what I wanted to do in my land deck. As a commander, I totally get that. That is a very interesting way to have at top of your deck, and I completely get it. Yeah, she's super cool.
Oh, she is great. She really is fun.
How about you guys, Max or Chris? Is this a situation where the commander has made a deck fun in a way that like it wasn't before?
Well, I once had a deck that I thought was fun, speaking to your veto deck, that I told everyone that all it was equipment. And you guys were all like, yeah, okay, yep, and still just got murdered, murked by everybody on the table, even though that's all it was. And I was playing Narset Enlightened Master.
Sure, I mean, yeah.
And just because of who the general was, got murked off the table. So then I changed it to something else, and then just decided I didn't like equipment, so I stopped playing it in general. But that's like the only thing I can really relate to what you were talking about.
I mean, I've tried equipment a couple different times. The first time I built mono white with Kemba, and then at one point I tried Teysa, Envoy of Ghosts, who was the 7-mana Teysa, to try Orzhov equipment. And it kind of worked unless someone killed Teysa. And I'm like, oh, well, now she costs 9.
9 is fine. 9 is fine. I have 2 commanders together that cost 10 in my Orzhov deck.
And actually, in hindsight, I think the problem was I built her with swords, which cost 2 to equip, excuse me. And when your creature has protection from creatures, the pro color stuff on the swords doesn't really matter. I probably should have built her with a bunch of like garbage equipment that give your commander +2/+0 or something that equip for like 1 or 0.
Or auto equip when they come into play or stuff like that.
But I tried that, and like it never quite clicked, and so I gave it one more go this summer when I tried building that my Ardean and Essior deck to build Azorius equipment, and it just, again, so finally it clicked. I finally was able to take that shell of that equipment deck and make it into something that worked for me. I shouldn't say worked, because plenty of decks work, but it worked in the way I wanted it to work for me as a player. So yeah, that's been one I've been able to do here also. And Max, I guess maybe your Brago deck, or not Brago deck, your Brago deck from Grand Arbiter kind of fits this as well. It was a threat, but that also probably changed how you played it as well.
Yeah, very much so. Otherwise, I don't think I have a situation like this. I tend to brew around the commander itself versus an idea, so
sure,
this is a little out of my wheelhouse, I think.
No, that's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that, because like for me, who tends to brew with the idea, it's much easier to like try to swap the commander out than it is for you, who specifically wanted to build a Sai Master Thopterus deck.
Right.
And then like if it's not working, you were kind of much more married to Sai than you were the actual deck itself.
Correct.
Okay, that's a good point. So side grades here, and I think, is this from you, Rekdar, or is this from Max or Chris?
Yes, this is from me. It was something that a friend of mine had brought up because I have a Teysa Karlov deck, like everybody else does. And I'm nothing if not original. But to meet the meta in my shop, I tuned it up and tuned it up and tuned it up, and it just wasn't fun to play against. So I had basically 2 decks. I could swap, say, I think it must be like 20 cards. I've not got the list in front of me. But it must be about 20 cards that I swap in and out if it needs to be the lower power version. And it turns from that combo, Grave Pact, Revelark, Karmic Guide thing to stuff like Field of Souls, Ogre Slumlord, and a load of sack fodder. And it turns to, right, I'm going to either mill out or you're all going to die. Let's just see which one happens first. And he turned to me and said, do you know, I think Elenda the Dusk Rose, and this was before the change to the graveyard rule, and she cost £1 million. He turned around and said, maybe Elenda would work better because then you get more tokens. And you may actually win a game instead of milling out. I said, nah, that's not fun. But it was an idea that the deck didn't get better. It just fit a little bit more thematically.
We actually had a listener, James, come visit us a couple years back, shortly after Elenda was released, and played Elenda in the shop with us one night, which was the first time I had seen an Elenda deck, and this was also prior to that, the rules change, so there was a lot more hoops to jump through at the time to get Elenda to trigger. So no one was playing it really. It was a cheap card at the time, and also something you hadn't seen as a commander. It was super fun to play against that deck and to watch it because of those hoops. That made it a really interesting thing to play because he had to put the commander in the graveyard to get the trigger. So I mean, there was a lot of reanimation stuff that had to happen as well to get it back out and do it all again, which made for a fun experience. Like instead of dismissing the commander, he decided to try to find a way to make that work, and it was just a really fun, neat deck. So I did want to mention that briefly, but also the side grade thing here, you talked about swapping cards out too. We've mentioned in the past how it's nice to have decks at different power levels so you can match whatever the group or pod is playing at. That's easier said than done for a lot of people who maybe don't have the ability to make decks at different power levels. So that's a really good solution to that problem as well, where, if you can't have a bunch of decks, maybe have that one that's a little bit modular where you can swap out these dozen cards or 15 or 20, whatever it winds up being for you, and tweak the power level of that deck to get the play experience you want based on the group you're playing with. So yeah, I like that.
I like those players that have like the Maelstrom Wanderer type decks where they have, like 100 card box that they set out on the table, and they're like, okay, I'm just going to set these out. You guys count out 40 cards, and that's what my deck's going to be.
Right, yeah.
And it's a random thing, so then it's not really, I wouldn't say like side grading or like depowering the deck per se, but then it's just a random thing because your deck's not built to just do one thing. It's just like, well, let's see what happens.
Well, and you have situations, people like one of the things Jason Alt is known for is alcoholism. But the other thing he's known for is...
I didn't even know how to approach that. I was like, oh boy, here we go.
He's gonna fire me along with Matt Morgan now. The other thing he's known for is 75% theory for Commander, which is the theory that you build your deck so it can play up and down depending on who you're playing against. And one of the ways he does that is he runs cards that kind of scale with the power of the group. When you cast a Bribery against somebody who's running, a Precon, there's probably not a lot of crazy stuff you're going to steal from their deck. When you cast it against somebody who's playing a really tuned Brea deck, then maybe you could go grab that Wormcoil Engine out of their list or something or a Sun Titan or whatever. There's much better. It's the kind of card that scales with the group you're in or the play group you're in too. So that's definitely something you can do to kind of tweak those decks for sure.
I like an idea like that. That's actually pretty cool, trying to find cards that scale.
Yeah. So that's kind of Jason's claim to fame, where we've side graded into a side conversation, but yeah, I like that. So any final thoughts about this, about what it's like to actually change your commander? Have you seen anybody else where you've witnessed, not even from your own personal experience, but this person had this deck and the commander changed and it changed how the deck was to play against? Is that something you've experienced with? Anybody? Or should have set you guys up for that better than just asking live when you have not had a chance to think about it at all.
I'm really starting to think, because there's a few people I've seen who have done 5-color dragon decks, and I've watched them swap between Scion and the Ur-Dragon, and some people prefer the Scion route of play, and some people prefer the Ur-Dragon route of play. So, I mean, it's hard to really say that I've seen someone switch it back and forth type of deal. They tried both and then picked one or the other, and that's how they like to play.
Well, so here's and I guess I could have opened with this, but here's the example I'm thinking of. Joey Schultz on EDH Recast had built a Rakdos deck with Kardur, the demon from, I think that was in Kaldheim.
Yep.
Who's
That's the Minotaur, right?
Yeah, no, the demon that when he ETBs, you goad everybody.
Okay, yeah, I thought that was a Minotaur, but yeah.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong. It could be a Minotaur. Either way, that he built that deck. With a ton of red, temp clone effects and blink effects and bounce effects. And the deck very much got it was very easy to get to the point where it was tough to interact with. He would play Cardour, and then because he had instant speed ways to copy it, clone it, blink it, whatever, even if he went to remove Cardour, he could just instant speed respond to get a trigger again for next turn, and then next turn recast it and get a blink trigger or something. And you could find yourself in a place where you just couldn't really do very much at all. So it was a situation where you had to kill the deck before he could play, or you would just be like unable to control your own actions, basically. He switched it then this summer when Forgotten Realms came out to what was the Rakdos commander you mentioned as replacing your Mogis deck with, Chris, the Beholder?
The Cavaleric or something like that. I don't remember how to pronounce it.
Yeah, I don't either. But so someone's yelling at their podcast app right now about how we.
They are too.
Yeah, Kazakher.
There you
Something
go.
like
There
that.
we go. So he switched to that Kazakher because that requires an attack trigger to get the goad. It does a very similar thing, but it also feels, again, it's maybe a little bit like Max's Brago deck, where as good as it is, because you have a chance to respond, it doesn't feel as bad when you get locked out. Brago has to be in play, and then he has to either get haste or wait the next turn till he can swing, and he has to have other things in play that are worth blinking. It's not super difficult to reach those, three things, but like you can, as his opponent, interact with that in some way. The same thing is with Kazakher. Kazakher has to come down. It has to, either have haste or have a turn in play to be able to attack. There's an opportunity there for you to stop it from happening. And that does feel a whole lot different than a deck where you don't feel like you have a good opportunity to interact with it. So if for me, even playing against that deck of Joey's, it changed how irritating the deck was, because I feel like eventually I'm going to get screwed, but I have a chance to prevent it at least. And that makes a world of difference as an opponent. Okay, so I think that is going to wrap up this episode of Commander Central. We talked about the different experiences we've had with replacing commanders. We would like to thank Rekdar here for joining us and for supporting the show for the last year or so. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. And thanks for coming out and being our guest.
It's not a problem. I love the content. I'll be supporting you for as long as I can.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. And everyone else out there, thank you very much for supporting us and for listening. We will be back next week with another show. I am Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him on Twitter at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. Until next week, I am Dana.
I'm Max.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Rekdar.